Hello everyone and welcome to The Sydneyist. I'm Elizabeth Farrelly. Welcome you here to a program whose motto is much curiosity, a smidgen of cheek and definitely no whinging. We're broadcasting here at Eastside Radio from the Alan Slate studio on 89.7 FM or streaming on eastsidefm.org. Tonight we're looking at co-op housing. Many of us have ideas about living cooperatively, maybe for cost reasons, maybe just for fun or for company, or to live with friends, or so we can keep chooks, maybe. But the technicalities can seem quite daunting. My guest this evening to discuss all things co-op in Sydney is City of Sydney Greens councillor and former Deputy Lord Mayor, Sylvie Ellsmore. Welcome, Sylvie.
Lovely to be here.
Sylvie, you chair I think it's called the Housing for All Working Group, is that right?
Yes, that's right. So it's a relatively new advisory group that the City of Sydney set up to give advice on all matters housing.
Yes, all matters housing sounds, well, for one thing, it sounds a bit like things that the City of Sydney doesn't do anymore, but obviously it's starting to do them again. Is that right?
I think obviously we're in a housing crisis and it is a pretty new forum, but being able to bring together, say it's got the Tenants Union on it, Homelessness New South Wales, with the Property Council, with some people who have lived expertise as social housing tenants with architects. That's the idea. So,
yes.
And cooperative housing was one of the issues identified relatively early on that the city could explore to do more of or support or understand better.
Yes. And you've got a couple, or at least one exciting project in that regard, which I want to come to in a minute. But I just, first of all, want to ask you whether you have any insight into the question in my mind, which is that co-ops are fairly rare here in Sydney and in Australia generally, given that we're in a housing crisis, and that's been growing for some time. It's not like it's new. And lots of people would like and need cheaper but also more engaged forms of housing. And given that a recent study found that people living in co-ops have lower costs, higher satisfaction, a pleasure, and I'm quoting here, in new skills leading to other education and employment opportunities, a strong sense of home, solid social bonds, and an improved sense of health and well-being, and that these positives were passed on to their children. And importantly, the study said found participants had a strong sense of agency and voice, which is often missing in other housing tenures, especially renting. And anybody who's rented in Sydney in the last 10 years or more knows exactly what that sense of no agency feels like. So do you have any insight into why, given that it's very popular and common in other cities like Hamburg and Freiburg and Copenhagen and London and many bits of Sweden, why is it so rare here?
Yeah, so I think when we just recently approved a grant to set up a new housing co-op in the inner city through council, and it'll be the first one in the inner city in more than 30 years.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, and ultimately I was partly reading up again on different jurisdictions for this program today, but the lesson we got when we visited co-ops as well, and I get a lot of groups coming to me and saying, we really want to live collectively, we've got a bit of money. The key challenge is both that it's hard to find a site, that lenders don't tend to want to lend to somebody, and there is a lack of government support. Yeah. The history of how co-ops are set up in the first place, they usually need a big institutional player or they need government to come in and back the community.
By giving them money.
By either giving them money or land or lending them and saying, you know what, we'll invest in you and you can pay us back over the next 30 years or whatever. That is how, say, Stucco, as the student cooperative that still offers $110 a week rents,
what?
if you can believe.
Does
so
it?
Stucco at University of Sydney,
it
has. It paid itself off. So it effectively borrowed from the University of Sydney, gave them the land, but they paid back the loan. Yeah. They paid it back 10 years ago, and they've been trying to get the university to not harvest their $110 a week rents, but in fact put it aside to help them set up a new co-op. That's what the generations of students' demand has been.
Good luck with that, I suppose.
Yeah. So government or a big institutional player is a little bit about the rules, but ultimately it's about that.
It is interesting, isn't it, that governments in other cities and countries seem to be very invested in finding ways of helping people in the city live well, and not so much here. But look, do tell us, if you would, about the new projects that you have in Darlinghurst.
Yeah, so this was wonderful. So one of the things that we went and visited some of the co-ops that already exist, and we've been talking to different cooperative groups, and the city was able to update its planning rules so that when we had a new grant fund coming, cooperatives were able to apply. And we got a couple of different suggestions, and the one that was successful is Common Equity and All Nations Housing, which will be a trans women's co-op. Yeah. The City of Sydney once we hand it over, we will no longer own a row of terraces in Darlinghurst, and that's going to become the permanent ownership of a co-op. The role of
that's pretty cool.
It's amazing. The role of the council will be to make sure that it's always protected and never kind of sold off and privatised. It's always got to be a co-op. It's always got to be affordable. But it can evolve once it's handed over. However, the community who lives there wants it to evolve. If they want to develop the site and make it so that more people can live there, how they want to arrange, we'll give them the land, and our role is just to protect it staying collective
with a covenant on the title or something. Yeah. So how many people will live there, or is that also up for...
So I understand that it's a trans women's collective who formed as a co-op and have been searching for about, I think, 8 years for a site with government support. So, look, to be honest, the terraces are a little run down and need a bit of work, so they'll need to do that work. Yes. They're going to need to find some other amount of funding as well to support it. But part of it is the city said, we'll back you. We're going to give the lion's share. Yes. And they've got a couple of years to be able to find their other forms of funding support to make that work. So, so I don't know how many, I think in the order of between 15 and 30 people will be able to live there, but it is a row of 7 attached terraces, and they'll own the whole site.
Quite serious real estate. And so what the city did was agree to sell it at significantly below market.
70% discount.
70%.
Which is quite a lot discount, isn't it?
Yes. We would all be very pleased with that, I would think. Okay. And how much, are there other properties that the city has that could be done this with?
So no, there isn't. To be honest, the City of Sydney's given away, and before I'm relatively new to this council. I've been on the council for term 2.5 years. The council had given most of its land away. Given grants or, partially funded or gave cash away. But essentially, other than some car parks that people might have their eye on, there isn't a lot of remaining land. But also, I think one of the things about the ways we need to talk about how co-ops might be built now, as opposed to the idea of what they might have been built 30 or 40 years ago when it wasn't terribly expensive in the city, but it was still quite expensive, is to talk about how can we use existing buildings or, in particular, residential apartment blocks. They can be a form of co-op too. I think often people have in their mind this idea that you need to have this big farmland and you do have your chickens and you've got an urban cooperative, and the way that other big built-up cities do them, how they do them in New York, is much more like it's just a different way of organising the same kind of housing that everyone else lives in. It just protects it to be collective, and it puts the people who live in that building in control, and no one can ever kind of privatise and monetise that piece. The way they can't treat it like a speculative asset. It's got to be a home.
So I'm curious about how people ensure that they keep on getting on with each other in a situation like that, because, where communes are sort of famously wonderful for the first couple of years, then everyone falls out with each other and it's a disaster. But is there a mechanism, I suppose, in the cooperative, I don't know, if the legislation or the mechanisms that it sets up to... Do they have easy dispute resolution? How does that work? I'm trying to imagine how this works.
No, it's interesting. I think the lesson from all the international cooperative research is that there's no one right way to do it. There are some key principles about the way co-ops have to work. So they have to be that everyone is equal who lives in the housing, that you're all sharing the responsibility and the ownership. But there are certain types of co-ops, like I mentioned Stucco before, the student one, which is a leasehold co-op. So it's got a legal entity and a different generation of students churns through it. They apply, and whoever's living in it at the time decides who's going to come in next. They get interviewed, and they have very regular meetings. I'm not sure if it's every week or every fortnight that they meet. But, you have students staying there for a stable housing for a long period of time who have real investment, and they get to do innovative things with that, even if they are in a leasehold co-op. Other kind of co-ops.
So, leasing it, they're leasing it from the university, or they're leasing.
So it's a legal entity that is the co-op,
yeah,
and then its rules require. So it's a bit like any corporation where you would elect your board, except you're all equally owning some of the shares. And so there's other kind of co-ops where people have full ownership. They're not leasing from anybody.
Yeah.
And there's different models about how much money you put in at the beginning, but a common rule around it is that if you leave the co-op and you want to sell out of your bid or you want to leave, you don't get to take that piece with you. You may or may not get to take some form of money away if you put some in at the beginning. There's different financial models that work, and it also depends on how much money the people have who set up the co-op in the first place. Yeah. Most of Australia's co-ops tend to be for lower income people on subsidies, so there'll be a mix of different levels of income that live in that co-op.
Okay, and so.
But it does require a lot of meetings. I guess there's one of the principles of co-ops that's different.
Yes.
But, if you live in a strata, I guess you have the option not to join your strata committee. But essentially that is the idea. For you're your own landlord. You control where you live.
Yes,
it does require you to actually be involved in that process. But the research says that it means ultimately people feel much better about their housing and that it works out.
So in some cases people pay rent to the cooperative, I suppose, and that rent is agreed and set by everybody cooperatively.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. And in some cases, you might get together with 25 friends and all put in, I don't know, $300,000 and decide to build something.
That's right.
Together.
And then you'd get to set the rules then yourselves about how would it work if someone else wanted to buy in or you wanted to leave. There are some restrictions in Australia about the rules about how that works, but actually there's quite a lot of flexibility.
Yeah.
It depends what people need. When we say the artist co-ops we visited in Erskineville, some of them are people's forever homes, and they deal with things like people ageing in place by moving around in the different apartments in the complex to suit them better if one of them has kids or needs a carer.
Yeah.
In other artist co-ops, people stay for maybe 5 or 10 years, and then when they're not practicing so much, they might move on, or if they decide they don't want to raise their family there. And it's a bit of a mix of people's forever homes and inviting applications from the community, and whoever's living there at the time decides who is going to be able to join their community.
Yeah.
So all different models work. Yeah.
Isn't it interesting? So, I mean, I don't know what the legislation says, but it sounds as though it's fairly accommodating in terms of what you actually want to do.
I think, one of the criticisms of why perhaps there aren't as many co-ops in Australia is that it is difficult to get income support unless you have a lot of low-income people in your not-for-profit housing, and those models often don't add up for to set up a co-op as opposed to a community housing provider. Overseas, what you see, so you talk about somewhere like Vienna where they tax everybody, they take some of that tax and give half of it to public housing and then half of it to what they call limited profit housing. It's the kind of co-op that you buy into. It's open to so many more people and more income levels that helps the system pay for itself a bit more. It's more universal. Yeah. It's less about what we understand, the kind of people that BRB access public housing to a wider range of people. It's more universal, ultimately. It
sounds rather nice, I think. Have you been to any cooperative housing? Like, what's it?
So I've visited the
like?
cooperative housing in the inner city. The few co-ops that I mentioned, the artist co-ops and like Alpha House, and I always get it wrong with the other artist co-op the name is Our Home spelt backwards.
Oh, okay.
I can never pronounce properly. And Stucco. Arua. Anyway, I'm going to get that wrong. Someone's going to be listening and go, that's not how you say it.
Yeah.
And what was lovely about it is it was clear how different the kind of communities were and the vibe and the types of people. It suited different kinds of people doing different things. So the Alpha House Co-op also has a big artist studio built into it that people use. And the other co-op we talked about was designed with the support of the state government to have walls. The buildings are set up in a way that it's easy to change the walls inside.
Whoa.
So that people it acknowledged that people were going to age in place and that over time they may have kids or might need a carer or to try and accommodate that.
That sounds really tricky to manage.
It does. But it is one thing that I've been reflecting on about how we support more co-ops to be set up in Sydney, is that if we shouldn't limit ourselves to the idea of a co-op that you build from scratch that has all of those design features.
Yeah.
I think we are already a very dense city, and just like the co-op that we funded that's going to be set up in Darlinghurst in a row of terraces, we should be thinking about how we can say, look, how well it can work in other places if we think of it just people living exactly the same way as they live in any other kinds of different buildings, that, you know, density as it is.
Imagining Sydney
but
sort of
with a different governance.
Everywhere.
That's right, with
Yeah.
a different governance model,
Really
with a collective perspective, and
Yeah.
with that profit motive
Yes.
taken out of it,
Yeah.
which makes everything more
Sounds
affordable.
like a good idea to me. This is a good moment for us to have a quick music break.
Captain Shade is in the park again. He's dying in the dark again. Me and Yolanda crying in the hotel room. Take my heart, though it's insane. Too much love and too much pain. And if we could hold on to this fading day, could we be the ones who find our way past the blood and the bleach to something true? Could we come home soon? I wanna come home soon. I wanna come home soon. Reach for me, I'll reach for you. I wanna come home soon. Oh, Shady threw his soul away. Now he's made of thirst and Tanqueray. But I'm packing up mine for the road again. From the twisted joints of Chicopee through the acid streets of Venice Beach. And if we could hold on to this fading day, could we be the ones who find our way as the blood and the bleach to something true? Could we come home soon? I wanna come home soon. I wanna come home soon. Reach for me, I'll reach for you. I wanna come home soon.
An American singer-songwriter called Island Jewel with a song called Come Home Soon from an album called Get Behind the Wheel 2023. I'm Elizabeth Farrelly here with you at the Sydneyist in the Alan Slate studio in the deep dark dungeon of Eastside Radio, 89.7 FM, and I'm here speaking with City of Sydney Greens Councillor Sylvie Ellsmore about cooperative housing. Sylvie, a few years ago, I spent some time actually with a couple of friends trying to develop an idea. We thought, wouldn't it be great if, and I think a lot of people think this, as we get older, we don't have to do horrible aged care or any of that sort of stuff, because none of us wants to do that. What we'd like is to live somewhere in sort of Surrey Hills. And what if we could build maybe 20 units and you could have shared, painting studios and garden space and maybe beehives and, we could have a grass roof and solar power. It could be off-grid, and then we tried to invent. The architecture was relatively easy, even though you have to think about how people could get older or sicker and maybe have to have a carer live in and move from one bedroom to two or something. Those are relatively simple. But when we tried to think about the ownership issues and how people would put money in or take money out and if they needed to leave or if they died, what their children do and their estate. So is that stuff as complicated as I think.
Look, it's fair to say there's lots of different models of co-ops.
Yes.
But also that there's some amazing research out there that kind of says, and this is how you can make it work.
Yeah.
I mean, I was reading some of those reports today in preparation for meeting with you.
Yes.
But yeah, it does. There's lots of ways to do it depending on what you've got, I guess would be a more empowering way to look at it. That it isn't going to be possible to do it without having some money to put in or having a backer. And that's what we talked about, that the single biggest thing it looks like that's holding back the co-op sector is whether there's big institutional
people will
and
lend
government
to them.
lending and backing these projects, because they are pretty innovative, and we know that finance doesn't like to lend to things it's not used to, but also because the risk is spread across lots of people. I'd like to be able to bed down a couple of people rather than a lot of people. But it can be a model where people pay a bit of money, like in Vienna, you pay a bit of money to get in. You have the government providing some money to allow the new housing to be set up. You pay a bit of money. You then pay a very discounted rent effectively. You can leave when you choose to, but you don't get to take
the money
the money with you.
Yes.
Other models are people are just a straight up, we're going to own this together.
Yes.
And then if someone decides to leave, we need to have written the rules about how we give each other permission to change those arrangements.
Yes.
And just be really clear about them. And then other ones can be, there's a co-op model, and when you join it, you get a vote, so you get to run things, but effectively you pay rent, and it's the entity of the co-op that owns all the things, but that entity must stay collective, even if that collective of people churns over time with leasehold, and we just have the rules about how we decide who gets to select who comes in and who goes. So it really does depend. There's no like kind of quick, short answer.
In lots of ways, a rental model like that sounds easier because it's not that great. You know, I think we're all bound by that dreadful thing that our house or our home is our principal investment.
That's right.
And that awful kind of burden that it places on
And that is
you.
the one thing that it removes, and I would argue absolutely for the good, is that it removes that ability to make a lot of profit out of the housing at the end. I mean, that's why it can be more affordable.
Not even the ability, but actually the compulsion, the requirement that you speculate on your own house, which is kind of horrible.
So it's better to think of it more like public housing or community housing, except which have different kind of models for how they're funded in terms of the income streams, because even public housing tenants, if they earn a certain amount, have to pay market rent, for example. But it's the people who live in it that get to stay in control, but also have responsibility for making things work. So if repairs have to happen, you have to work out how to do it with all the other people that are in your co-op equally.
You just have to work it out, which is quite a good life lesson, I suppose. So in the cases where, and it seems like this is most cases in Sydney or New South Wales, where it's essentially subsidised housing one way or another, and I think I'm right in saying that it's usually therefore means tested.
Yes, that's right.
So do you get thrown out if you earn more money? If you get a better job, do you get chucked out? How does that work?
Again, it depends on how they've written the rules of the co-op to be set up. And
that
to be
sounds
honest,
a bit kind of
it's one of the criticisms
harsh.
of some community housing as well, is that some community housing is set up so if you earn more money, they'll just charge you more rent and you can stay for a long period. But others are set up so that it's not designed to be people's forever homes. If you earn a certain amount, you get a little bit of time and you're asked to leave. Given the gap then about how expensive the private market is, that's very brutal. But it can be the only way that these organisations can get access to the way the government benefits are currently, NRAS and things like that are currently structured.
Yes.
So that is one of the policy things that could change.
Yeah.
But I think we should be asking governments to be thinking of it as an investment for everybody, to be the big institutional player that makes sort of that middle bit of affordable housing as well as low-income housing available for people. I think that's the bit that's also really missing in our housing market.
Yes.
To make our cities more affordable, gives people more choice then. Coincidentally drives rents down if people in the middle have more choices about what they're going to do with themselves.
Yes, and that's a big jump, isn't it? Because we're so used in Sydney and in New South Wales to thinking of any form of subsidised housing as being just really low rent, as it were. Yes.
Really,
and so that stigma, even though we probably pretend that it doesn't exist, really does. Whereas a lot of places, and it's not just places like Singapore where it's something like 80%, but a lot of bits of Europe, the percentage of public housing tenants is actually enormous. And it's very middle class and dignified, which seems to me a much better option, not least because it means that if you do have money saved, you invest in other things, maybe creative businesses instead of just your own home. And what would be wrong with that?
And it means that more of the community is invested in the same housing system.
Yes.
It's really one of the nasty things about how much we've residualised our public housing. It's the right wanted to do that partly because it made it really easy to marginalise and pick off people without a lot of income.
Yes.
And ratbags and artists and all the rest of the people who tend not to live with secure income, troublemakers in our society.
Dreadful people, yes.
That's right. But having a system where many more different kinds of people, perhaps even the majority of people, are invested in an affordable system that works for all of them means they'll fight to protect that system. Same principle behind, why people fight for Medicare, etc. Whereas I managed to talk to the Paris Deputy Mayor for housing about how they've smashed through their targets. They've got 25% on the rest of it, and very explicitly have a principle of we want to universalise this. We want everyone to have investment. Every community should be a mixed community so that middle class and upper class people can't just be there without anybody else. That's very unhealthy. We've got to make those a better mixed community. And it also means they have a system that has more money flowing through it to support itself. It reinforces itself. It means that you can't make the argument it's a huge drain on government resources because middle class people have more money to spend.
It does seem healthier, doesn't it? Especially in a situation as we're in now where, a young couple with kids can be earning $250,000 between them and still have no hope of buying anywhere to live. And have to go and, just actually leave town. So it seems an obvious move to make this kind of housing a middle class desirable. But so just quickly, we've got about a minute and a half left, I think, or perhaps less. If you could, fix the system in Sydney, what would you change to make this possible?
So I think the two things that we need to do is government, including council, needs to get massively more involved in the system because the market has too much control over it.
Actually building housing?
Or investing with, say, collectives of older women who want to have that stable housing, but they need someone to come in and back them as their not-for-profit investor. And we need to make private developers pay a huge amount more. We make them pay 1-2%.
As a levy.
As a levy for affordable housing. It's 35% or more in Paris and London.
Yeah, I think in Vienna it's like 50% or something.
Yeah,
it's enormous.
It's not more expensive to build there than here.
Yeah.
We need to do that as well.
Excellent. I think we'll put you in charge. Well, that's it, I'm afraid. It's a wrap, as they say. I've been talking with Greens Councillor Sylvie Ellsmore about cooperative housing in Sydney and how we could get more of it. Next week, we'll be chatting with our first ever developer on this show. Do not forget to tune in for that. Meanwhile, if you have any great ideas or questions for us, please drop us a line to the Sydneyist at eastsidefm.org. We're handing over now to Yon on the Vinyl Frontier. Thanks for joining.